Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is returning to the show. Katie Pye is here to celebrate Recipe for Disaster, the latest in her fairy tale fraud series. Before we invite Katie into the studio, we want to let you know we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids certified great read, Lily's Lost Smile, written by Payal Burnham. It's a wonderful book, especially if you have a child that is struggling to learn how to pronounce the letter L. The story follows little Lily, who loves to smile, laugh, and giggle all the time. But suddenly, Lily's smile is lost. It is turned into a loud yell and cry. Her parents try to calm Lily down, but it doesn't work. It's a fun, read-out-loud book that is sweetly illustrated with lots of things to talk about. Check it out today. You can read our full review on our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Congratulations once again to Payal Burnham. Lily's Lost Smile is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. Joining us right now from sunny Nelson on the South Island of New Zealand. I'm told that's the only place to be. Our guest is returning to the show to celebrate the latest in her fractured fairy tale series. It's called Recipe for Disaster. Please welcome back Katie Pye. Katie, how are you?
Hey, it's great to be here. Yeah, it's really good. Great to be here.
Really super to have you back on the show. I'm really excited. I love the fact that, you know, when you were reminding me of where you are, you said sunny Nelson, the only place to be. Before you tell us about the book, tell us a little bit about sunny Nelson.
Oh my goodness. It's the place in New Zealand which has the best access to all the nature that New Zealand offers. I mean, we've got spots across New Zealand, but you place yourself here, you get the sunshine hours that come through from Australia, but also you've just on your back doorstep, mountains, rivers, the ocean. It's incredible.
I was sharing with Katie, I have a couple of friends from New Zealand. One is currently a mayor of a town in New Zealand. The other has immigrated here to the United States, but he just returned. And my buddy who just returned was like, it's so weird because New Zealand is back to normal. You can walk around and there aren't restrictions. He had to stay in a hotel that was guarded by the army for 2 weeks before he could be allowed to circulate with people. But it was just such a relief for him. And, after being with him and hearing that experience and communicating with my buddy who's living in New Zealand, I just took a Google Earth tour of New Zealand, was just kind of zeroing in on the satellite image and imagining what it would be like to visit your country. And I tell you, I can't wait. It is definitely on my bucket list of places I want to visit.
Awesome. Yeah, it offers so much in one small country. Yeah. And I have to say, it does really feel like Hobbiton here. We're really mindful of how privileged our situation is, recognising that the rest of the world is going through some really difficult situations, and we're sort of being sheltered in this way, just being enclosed in islands and being able to stomp out COVID the way that we have.
Well, yeah, I obviously being on an island in that kind of isolation, you're better able to isolate as a nation, but I think it's more than just luck and more than just geography. From what I've read and the news reports and whatnot, New Zealand seemed to really come together to work together to beat this and to stomp out the virus. And so I think it's more than just luck. I think a lot of credit has to go with that the community that exists on New Zealand.
Yeah, I think it's part of our culture for sure that we have this do the right thing, and we have in the Māori language, it's our kaupapa, it's what we're about, that we're supporting each other. So we're looking out for neighbours, and if we show any symptoms whatsoever, people just choose voluntarily to self-isolate, and we're just very concerned for the other as part of our culture. It's not exclusive to New Zealand that we do that, but it's definitely part of who we are.
I love that, concerned for the other. So important. What a great value to teach our kids.
Yeah, and it's probably been the value that has driven a lot of my writing. It's the reason that I've invested the last 3 or so years to writing and releasing these fairy tale retellings, is because I'm not only concerned for the well-being of my own children growing up, but also supporting other parents who, like me, struggle day to day to have moments with their children of meaning, and trying to make it easier for them to instill values or support to their kids in a way that is palatable for kids and easy for parents.
Yeah. You know, I love what you just said, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what's behind the recipe for the disaster. But you said something, and I want to just kind of magnify and highlight it. You said that you're looking to help parents find, moments of value, quality moments with their kids. And I think that's exactly what we can have every time we choose to sit down and read with our kids, no matter what age it is they are. That's an opportunity for us to have a very mindful, purposeful interaction with our kids that has great value for us, great value and benefits for our kids. And I just love that. And I love when authors are conscious of the fact that they're doing more than just pushing out something that's going to entertain. In creating a book and writing stories and publishing stories, you're creating moments, real, true moments of value and bonding and love between families.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like to think of it as we all have love banks. And every time we spend moments with our children, whether it be eye contact and a little wink across the room when they have something funny happen, or reading a book, or throwing a ball, or even just sort of folding up their washing and putting it on the end of their bed, when we have these, we're filling their love banks. And when you've got a full love bank, you have more resilience when you have situations that are hard, because you're in the positive, And so, yeah, I'd love to help people fill their children's love banks, and laughing together is a great way of doing that.
Yeah. I've never thought of that the more love we give to kids, and to use your expression, as we help fill their love bank, we're actually helping them become more resilient. Again, we're going to get to talking directly about your book, but why do you think that is?
I think it builds their sense of self, their sense of identity, their sense of being held and surrounded. And those things are always what we draw on when we go through difficult times. So a full love bank actually really helps when people are faced with difficulty.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a lot easier picking yourself up and facing problems when you know that you have love, that you have that support. I remember being at a dance competition, and my daughter wanted to do a solo, and there was a lot of politics in the studio that she was at, and she wasn't old enough or hadn't spent enough time or spent enough money there, and she couldn't do that. But we figured out a way that we could go out and on her own and get her into a dance competition and do that solo. And beforehand, she was so nervous, and the tears started to come, and my wife and I both said to her, look, it doesn't matter what happens out there. You can go out there and totally fail. You can choose not to go out there. You can go out there and win. No matter what, we're going to love you. The outcome isn't going to change that. We love you with all of our hearts, and that's always going to be the case.
Yeah. And also, as well as others loving, the sense of self-love as well. And I think that grows as we recognise that we're lovable. So we sort of see in other people a mirror back to ourselves. And as parents and supporters of the children feed in and fill that love bank, they bounce back. That mirror bounces back on them and they say, I am lovable, I am worthy, I am awesome, I can do this ballet thing, and whatever happens, it's going to be fine because I am strong,
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us, what's the secret behind Recipe for Disaster?
It's the story of the little red hen, and I love this character because she's hardworking and studious, but unlike the traditional tale of the little red hen, in my version, my fairy tale forward version, she believes she must do it all by herself. And so she goes about life, and she's quite an accomplished red hen because she's got an award-winning bakery, and she goes about life trying to do things herself. But she's hit by a situation where she is faced with too much and still holds really strongly to this mantra, I must do it myself. And that, as the title suggests, becomes the recipe for disaster, not asking for help when you need it.
We're kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier, just this idea of community and looking out and wanting the best for others. And in order to do that, sometimes we need to be willing to be vulnerable and to ask for help.
Yeah, and it can be a huge challenge. I realised in writing this book, I went through this moment when I was putting through all the materials together that accompany the book, that I realised I'm the little red hen. I'm writing this about myself. And I grew up in a family with 6 children, and I saw my mother who would do a whole lot of things for our household. She'd sit down and then within about 10 seconds she'd be up again. It's like she couldn't sit down and rest. And I learned that from her. And as a result, I became the little red hen myself, doing things all by myself and not using my community. But it's so essential that our children, and I think the adult readers who this is going to resonate with, realise that it's okay to draw on our community, like you said.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And there's so many moments in our life where we celebrate that. If you are a sports fan, you celebrate great teams, and every team has their star, but, the star is always reminding us, hey, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have my players helping me and supporting me. So many of us love music and love musicians, and even when we're our favorite artist is a solo artist, we understand that that solo artist has players on stage with him or her supporting her. So it's funny that so many of us, while we celebrate collaborations in our lives and really look forward and those are kind of the highlights of our life, so many of us forget to collaborate with others in our day-to-day lives.
Exactly. And one of the things that the children see as they go through reading the story is at the end of the story what Red Hen was able to achieve by drawing on help. So at the beginning she's running this very successful bakery and getting a whole lot of awards and that kind of thing. But by the end of the story, when she'd realised the importance of asking for help, she was able to expand her bakery and take it nationwide, and it was just so much bigger. And often we sort of look at asking for help as this negative thing and don't take a spin on it and go, what could be achieved if I ask for help in this situation?
Yeah. I wonder where this comes from. I know here in the States we've had that, when folks started leaving the East Coast and expanded westward, it was that whole go west young man kind of attitude, get out there by yourself, be a trailblazer, pick yourself up by the bootstraps. But it's not just here in the States. As you're observing, it's in New Zealand, it's in Australia, and it's in lots of parts of the world. Do you have any ideas of where this, kind of independent streak came from?
No, I don't know where it origin where it started from. But I do know that there is this very strong sense of I can't ask for help because they're too busy. I think it may have correlated with our worlds becoming more separate from each other, and our painting on other people's canvas, essentially, just sort of assuming onto their lives that they are too busy to help us or to be concerned with our things, or we couldn't put on them because our situation isn't bad enough to warrant help, because we hear about other people's situations who are so much worse. And let's face it, there will always be people who are facing situations that are harder than ours, but that doesn't mitigate the fact that we are struggling. And I think that can often be a barrier to people. I can't say that I'm struggling because I'm only coping with this situation, whereas my neighbour is coping with this, or I know somebody who's dealing with this, and it just becomes self-reinforcing. So maybe that's alongside the information age as well.
Yeah. Do you think it also might be, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, some people are sitting here thinking, well, I'm just not lovable enough to help?
I definitely believe there's a place in that, or I won't be lovable if I ask for help. People see my success as who I am, and that's who they love, my success, as opposed to me. And so by asking for help, I'm essentially saying I'm failing, and therefore they won't love me as much, which is so sad, because often the strongest friendships are built through the vulnerability of walking through what I call the raw and real with people. It just sort of creates what's communitas together as we sort of walk through tricky situations with people. I remember I lived for a season in Cambodia, and when people were going through really hard times in New Zealand, often you bring them a casserole or some baking or something just to indicate that you're there to help. And in Cambodia, it was quite a large part of the expat culture and expectation that you had helpers around the house to provide employment for the locals because they desperately needed it. But when it came to people going through difficult situations, you couldn't do an expression of help for them in that kind of traditional way, and you sort of felt like almost a bit more separate through their journey because they could be self-sufficient. And I think that's really tricky. I think it's important that we feel okay about giving and receiving help.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, I was just thinking, isn't it ironic that so many of us who are reluctant to ask our fellow human beings for help are very willing to become dependent on technology?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and there are things that people will put out there in the online world that they would never say face-to-face to people, isn't it? We can be so many different personalities these days, the real person that you see, but also the online. But there is a real benefit in technology for asking for help as well. I went through a very, very difficult season in my life where I wanted to have children and I couldn't. And I found online the most amazing community. And each time I went through a difficult season, I was able to talk to this community and receive help that other people in my circle would never have understood what I'm walking through. And I think there's definitely some huge value from going online and seeking help in that way. Yeah,
fascinating. This Fractured Fairy Tale series, it's a lot of fun. Remind us of all the titles that are available right now, please.
Absolutely. So I've actually written 14 and I'm releasing them progressively. Trip Trap Trouble, that's the story of the three billy goats gruff, and they go searching for the greenest grass. And it's actually a reenactment of the saying, the grass is greener on the other side. It's a story that teaches children about gratitude and appreciating your own grass, essentially. The poor troll in that story is exceptionally frustrated by all the noise overhead. Sibling Wars has been really popular with lots of people because it's a story of Hansel and Gretel and these two twins. They never stop fighting. There are no evil stepmothers in any of my stories because I haven't met an evil stepmother. That's not the current age. They actually get sent into time out and chase each other into the wood, and that's how they meet with the witch and need to get themselves free by working together. Jack's Giant Problem is a story that sparks a conversation. I call them conversation icebreakers. It sparks a conversation about empathy and considering others. We often think of Jack as a hero, but actually he's a bit of a rogue. He goes up to the top of the beanstalk and starts stealing things from the giant. And in my story, he steals something that the giant absolutely needs for daily life. And he goes back out and discovers the impact of his choice. Breaking News isn't strictly a fairy tale. It's the story of Humpty Dumpty, so it's a nursery rhyme. But his dad, King Dumpty, hates change. He decrees that nothing should ever change, and then Humpty Dumpty falls off the wall. So this is a really good one for children who are facing change. Dressed in the Best, there are a few of them. This is the last two for now. Dressed in the Best is the story of the Empress' new clothes, and this is probably one of the funniest ones I've written because he only is fully dressed in one page of my entire book. But it picks up the story of the Emperor's new clothes at the end, where the boy traditionally says, "Hey, he's got nothing on." But in my book, he glared at the boy. "Don't speak rubbish to me. I know what I'm wearing. That clearly can't be." And he goes trying to launch his clothing nationwide. He opens stores. He sends it to kings and queens and invites them to a banquet. And then they're not sure how to make sense of all this invisible clothing. He needs to learn in the end that he needs to listen to others. Mm-hmm. And finally, Ready for Rescue is the story of Rapunzel. And my Rapunzel is exceptionally reluctant to get on with tasks. These stories are mirrored from situations in my own parenting. And so Rapunzel's rescue is a little bit compromised by the fact that she doesn't get on with it. It's a heap of fun, but a good segue into a conversation about procrastination, and please just get on with what you're asked to do.
I love that. Please just get on with what you're meant to do. Wow, so much fun. The Fairy Tale Fraud series. I think I refer to it as Fractured Fairy Tales. That was a series of animated cartoons that I grew up loving. Do you ever have anybody come up to you and say, "Hey, what are you doing with the fairy tales? They were good enough the way they were"?
Actually, quite the opposite. I have a lot of people that come up to me and say, "Thank goodness you're doing this," because the fairy tales are actually terrible. When you think about the huntsman going into the wood and supposed to steal the heart out of Snow White, and just all these horrible things that happen in the stories that we're not even fed as children. But when you go into Wikipedia and read about the traditional stories, they're horrific.
Yes.
I have a lot of people valuing the fact that I'm drawing out some different themes and stories that they feel is inappropriate, especially the typical princess, which you have so many fairy tales where the princess is rescued by the prince, and people would like to see strong, independent women rescuing themselves from these situations, or even rescuing others, and so it's really fun to just sort of twist the fairy tales to bring out some more modern themes.
Yes. I would absolutely encourage, now I am not going to encourage you to read the original fairy tales to your kids. Maybe when they're teenagers you can sit down and read them together, but just as a learning experience, sit down and read those original fairy tales. They are quite horrific. It's just, my mind was blown the first time I read them.
Yeah, absolutely. They're awful.
Tell us, Katie, is there a place online where folks can go to learn more about you and learn more about the Fairy Tale Fraud series?
Absolutely. I've got a website, fairytalefraud.com.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the books are available on Amazon worldwide?
Yes, Amazon, and also I have an online store for New Zealand readers. Also, alongside each book, I've got material at the back that just helps keep a conversation going, and I'm progressively adding more and more material to my website just to support those conversations with kids. Yeah. So my vision is to provide a whole range of different fun activities that parents and educators can do with children as they hook them into a really fun story.
Yeah. I think that this would be a great addition to any family library, Fairy Tale Fraud. And I think, too, It's a great way to inspire kids to be creative. It's really hard. I think most creative folks, they begin by taking ideas that they see and adapting them and changing them, as opposed to trying to come up with something from scratch. So maybe, reading Fairy Tale Fraud will inspire kids to take their favorite, their other favorite books and characters and create their own stories out of them, and then perhaps grow up to be authors and filmmakers and songwriters.
That'd be awesome. I'd love to inspire the next generation. I don't know if you know this, but my mother is an author. She's had 100 published in New Zealand. Just shy of 100.
I am not aware of that. Congratulations to your mom.
Yeah. So I grew up with the rhythm and the rhyme, and some of the books that she wrote I actually inspired in my bedtime conversations with her. And so it's just about exposure. So if kids are exposed to lots of reading and lots of conversations about, hey, what if you did this with this story, or how would you change this, and that kind of thing, it can really inspire them into a career in this.
Yeah. Well, we got to give your mom a plug here. What's your mom's name?
She's in her 80s now, so many of her books are now out of print. But her most famous is a book called The Big Block of Chocolate, which got Platinum Award in New Zealand for being reprinted 3 times and selling over 1 million copies, which I think is pretty good.
That's not
in
bad.
New Zealand market, I think it was over 1 million. So, it's gone worldwide.
Okay, great. And what's her name?
Janet Slater Wallace.
Awesome. Well, talking about just passing on those creative genes, but it's, as you said, it's more than just genes. It's seeing our parents model different behaviors that we can, and showing us that we can do these things. It is possible for you to write your own book and to have it published. And of course, we always want to encourage our parents who are listening, our grandparents who are listening, to model reading to their kids, to let your kids catch you reading as often as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. We've had a wonderful time speaking with the author of the Fairy Tale Fraud series, talking about the brand new book in the series. It's called Recipe for Disaster. And our guest has been Katie Pye. Katie, thanks so much for being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Dennis Matthew. Our friend Dennis Matthew will be returning to the show to celebrate how Grizzly found gratitude. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. You may have heard at the beginning of the show that we announced that Payal Burnham's Lily's Lost Smile is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. If you are a parent, you want to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, read our entire review of Lily's Lost Smile. And if you're the author of a great children's book, you want to visit readingwithyourkids.com and check out our certified great read program. It could really help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to start by thanking our guest, Katie Pye. Be sure to check out her Fairy Tale Fraud series, especially the latest book, Recipe for Disaster. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Helen Frazier, Justina Thompson. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. We all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.